What can we learn from the last survivors about then and about now? Some 50 former inmates of the largest of the Nazi death camps at Auschwitz-Birkenau making the trip to Poland for the 80th anniversary. How to process the collective folly of the industrial-scale mass extermination of 1 million Jews, along with 100,000 others in the space of a few short years. The Holocaust, shattering the belief that technology could only be synonymous with progress. And on that score, the gas chambers serve as a cautionary tale. How do citizens and nations remember when we're living in 2025? From the former Soviets, whose forefathers liberated the camps, to nations at the other end of the globe untouched by World War II. What's the lesson? The words never again ring hollow in today's world. An all too long list of genocides have since unfolded. How then to talk about it? Today in the France 24 debate, lessons from the last survivors. With us, France 24's Claire Pacalin, who interviewed such said survivors in preparations for these commemorations. We'll be hearing clips from them in a moment. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
Also with us, attorney Rachel Fleur-Pardo, grandchild of Auschwitz survivors. Welcome back to the show.
Hello, thank you.
Dr. Bruno Halouya is a member of the Remembrance Commission of the French Jewish umbrella group, the CRIF, author of The Doctors of Auschwitz. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Omer Bartov, professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You can always listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate, wherever podcasts are streamed. King Charles, Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany, the President of Poland, many more world leaders on hand. None speaking, though, at the ceremony. Instead, the mic open to survivors, like 86-year-old Polish-born American Tova Friedman.
Since I was a little girl, I thought of it as my birthday. This is my birthday, January 27th. I celebrate it every single year. In fact, today I got all kinds of emails. Some of my friends don't even know that I have a regular birthday, because this is what counts.
An interesting take, Claire Pacalin, sort of, for her, a rebirth on January the 27th.
Certainly, she was only a little girl. She was 5 years old when she was deported. And there is a famous photograph of a group of children in Auschwitz showing their forearms, showing their tattoos to the photographer. And she's in that photo. And I had the opportunity of meeting Juliette Kolinka, who is one of the last French Auschwitz survivors who's still alive today. And she showed me her tattoo of her prisoner number on her arm. She said it was a bit awkward showing it because it's not really decoration, but she showed it to me, and it is remarkable today seeing people who are still alive who have a prisoner number tattooed onto their arm. I think that's really something quite poignant, and we can listen to Juliette Kolinka speaking to me in Paris with Stéphanie Trouillard a couple of months ago.
C'est un peu gênant de montrer ça en décoration alors que ça a tué tellement de monde. Quand on est arrivé, le train s'arrête, on aperçoit des cheminées qui dégagent une fumée un peu spéciale, et maintenant les ordres arrivent, déshabillez-vous. Pour moi, quand on me demande qu'est-ce qui est le pire, eh bien pour moi c'est ça. C'est le moment où j'ai été obligée d'être nue.
So Jeanette, when she spoke about the chimneys spewing out this strange kind of smoke, well, she arrived in Auschwitz after 3 days of a horrible journey on a train. She was separated from her father and her 12-year-old brother. She was put with the women. She was selected for forced labor. She was tattooed, shaved all over her body. When she says she was made to be naked, that was the first thing she was told to do. That was the worst experience for her because it was so humiliating. It was the dehumanization process had begun. Later on the day, she found out from prisoners who had been there longer, who knew how everything worked. She asked me, when am I going to see my family again? You're not going to see your family again. Can you see the smoke over there? That's your family. And that was her father and her little brother.
Gosh, what a story. And they're And she wasn't the only survivor. And I mean, you see her pluck when she describes it. She uses sort of gallows humor there.
Certainly, she's nearly 100 years old. She's remarkable. She's got a lot of energy. And I had also the opportunity to meet Arlette Testier. She lost her father. He was deported to Auschwitz. He never came home. Deported because he was Jewish. And she is what is known in France as a hidden child. So she was an enfant caché. She lived in hiding with kind souls who took her in during the war, during Nazis' occupation of France. And she showed us a gift that her father had sent her. So he was first arrested and sent to Pithiviers, which was a camp in France, not too far from Orléans, where many of the prisoners were kept before they were put on trains to Auschwitz. And he sent her a pen holder from Pithiviers, and she showed us the pen holder. And I think we can take a listen to her now, showing us this pen holder and telling us why it's so important to her.
Allez voir. Regardez. À ma chère petite Arlette, de ton papa qui t'aime. C'est la seule chose qui me reste, parce que tout a été spolié. Quand on est rentré après la guerre, il n'y avait plus rien. Notre appartement a été vidé. J'y tiens comme la prunelle de mes yeux, c'est pour ça que je la mets dans une boîte, parce que sinon je ne veux pas qu'il soit cassé. Pas qu'on l'abîme. C'est important. On n'a pas beaucoup de souvenirs, mais c'est vrai que le peu que l'on a nous sont tellement précieux, tellement précieux.
A lot to unpack there, because a reminder that not only were Jews rounded up and deported, but their apartments confiscated.
Certainly, I also worked on a report recently about these biens spoliés, is the word in French. So it's looted cultural property, often paintings, but not only. And those who survived the Holocaust coming back to their apartments and finding them empty, finding other people living in them, finding the door locked. And even today, there are, the Monuments Men who you may remember the George Clooney film that came out some years ago, an Allied unit which was tasked with finding these works of art. A lot of them were paintings in Germany and bringing them back and giving them back to their rightful owners. They found thousands and thousands of artworks, but some were never given back. It was hard to trace the families. Many had died, they'd been dispersed. And still today in France, there are a little over 2,000 artworks. They're being stored in museums or on display in museums. And museums are still today trying to work out who the legal heirs are. There's one at the Louvre, two actually at the Louvre, two still lifes of a Flemish painter. And the Louvre just managed to find out that there are 48 legal heirs to those two paintings that were stolen from Mathilde Javal, a Jewish woman living in Paris. Now, she survived the Holocaust. She tried to get her paintings back. The link was never made. And 80 years later, her rightful heirs have got the painting. They donated it back to the Louvre. But yes, certainly a big, big, big issue was for those who survived the Holocaust coming back to nothing.
Let me turn to you, Rachel Fleur-Pardo. What is it, this 80th anniversary mean, listening to those tales that we heard there?
I think this 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz camp may be the most important anniversary yet, because it may be the last one that survivors attend. The next anniversary, maybe the 19th, maybe there will be no more Auschwitz survivors to attend and to speak and to testify about their story. And I was actually really moved to hear you tell the story of Ginette Kolinka, and I was really moved also because I had the chance to meet her today at the Shoah Memorial in Paris. I'm really moved because, as a matter of fact, Ginette Kolinka was in the same convoy as my grandmother, and my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. And my grandmother...
These convoys were these train convoys that left first to a triage station north of Paris, oftentimes.
Yes, Drancy.
And then on to the camps.
Yeah, and then on to Auschwitz. And it is a convoy, it is number 71, and it left Drancy in April 1944. And there was Ginette Kolinka in this convoy, and there was also my grandmother, as I said, and my grandmother died when I was 5. And like many other survivors, like Ginette Kolinka herself, she didn't speak in her younger years. When she came back from the camps, she did not speak about what happened. Actually, she even told some of her friends never to ask her questions about what happened there. And so, as a granddaughter of a survivor, I often ask myself, what happened to her? How did she survive? And I live with the frustration not to be able to have her whole story because she died too young to speak about it. And I find information about what happened to my grandmother through Ginette Kolinka testimony, through what she says, because basically when she described, as you said, the moment when she got off the train and how she was separated from her father, actually the same thing happened to my grandmother because her father was killed the moment he arrived in Auschwitz. And my grandmother and my great-grandmother, Rachel, managed to survive. And why am I here today? Why is this so important? It is because as we have less and less survivors, and also as at the same time we see anti-Semitism rise all across the world and in Europe as well, it is, I guess, our duty, us, the younger generations, to share their voice, to share their story, and to assure that this will not be forgotten so that it never happens again.
Bruno Haluya, this 80th commemoration, you agree it's perhaps the most important? Does it always seem like the most important?
Yes, it's probably one of most important because probably, and it's very shallow, it's the last survivor. The last time that the survivor, we are going to see survivors, Holocaust survivor. It's very important for me, for my generation of second generation. My mother was in Paris during the war. She was an hidden child. The father of my mother was killed in Auschwitz. I was born in a family when there is no family. The particularities of Jewish in France is that they live before the war, during the war, and after the war in the same place. It's not like Holocaust survivors from US, they come from Poland to US or from some who go to Israel. Now, and they see people after the war who denounce them, the same policemen, the same people who keep their apartment. It's a paradox, it's a French paradox. And during a long time, Jewish from French don't want to speak about this period. And as Rachel Parlot say, for my generation, Holocaust survivors were victims. For their generation, Holocaust survivors were heroes. It's a great difference.
Omar Bartov, you're hearing that a generational difference here in the studio. How you talk about this has changed over the years.
Yes, it certainly has, and it is true that certainly in France in the early decades, one did not speak of victims, of Jewish victims. There was no distinction being made. But I would say, one important element, since we are in a French context, is that it should be stressed that many of the Jews who were deported from France were deported to such camps as Drancy or Pitié or taken to Veldiv. They were taken by the French police, and they were then handed over to the Germans. So part of the story of the Holocaust is really that it's a European story. It was a European undertaking carried out by the Nazi regime with multiple collaborating regimes, organizations throughout Europe. And for me, this is of particular importance because my own mother came from a small town that is now in Ukraine and at the time was in Poland called Buchach. And she left with her parents in 1935 when she was 11. So she came to Palestine, and that's the reason that I was born in Israel. But the entire rest of my family, and these were all extended families, was murdered there. And what's important in this story is that although the Germans came to that town and carried out that genocide on a very local level, it's not the story of deportations to Auschwitz. Half of the people were killed on the spot. It was the local population that participated and facilitated that killing. So again, the story of the Holocaust is a complex one because it involved so many people who were not part of the organizers of genocide or even of the country that was carrying it out, but did so for other reasons not least, as was said before, for reasons of property, of simply taking over people's homes.
Let me ask you, Omer, when you saw that the pan at one point during the ceremony of all the leaders, it's a reminder, following up on what you just said, about how different countries deal with it differently. In the case of Germany, we had the president of Germany, the chancellor. In 2025, there's no doubt it's a feeling of penitence almost. What we see on their part. If you go to major cities in Germany, they have plaques and reminders everywhere. For others, it's more ambiguous.
Well, first of all, you want to notice that who was there, but also who was not there. So Vladimir Putin was not there. And we have to remember, Auschwitz, for instance, was liberated by the Red Army. Putin was not there because he's now undertaking a criminal war against Ukraine. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel, a state that was founded in the aftermath of the Holocaust and found its legitimacy internationally in large part because of the Holocaust, was not there because there's an arrest warrant against him by the International Criminal Court. So yes, things have changed a great deal, and one has to remember that although Germany has taken a whole decades of penitence over the Holocaust, Germany now sees the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland, of the AfD, which is maybe one of the largest parties in Germany in the coming elections in the most powerful country of Europe, which is a party that will not speak about that past. It says that past is behind us, and we have to create now a Germany for Germans.
And cheerleaded by Donald Trump's ally, Elon Musk. Let me just ask you, because the Polish president had said that if Benjamin Netanyahu had wanted to come, they would not have honored the ICC arrest warrant request. Was it a good thing that Netanyahu stayed away?
Well, first of all, I don't think it was a good thing that the Polish president said that, but he probably didn't have a choice within the context. It's a very good thing that Netanyahu did not come, because if the lesson of the Holocaust is that one should not carry out crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide, then a head of state who is under the shadow of being accused of carrying out such crimes should certainly not represent the state of Israel. And there can be, and there is, I believe, another representative of that state, which should be represented, but not by someone who is under this kind of shadow of indictment.
Claire Pacana, let's go back to that point about how, this collective folly, as we described it at the outset, it wasn't the work of one nationality. And you kind of also had that impression when you saw some of the survivors, when they came back. Rachel Fleur-Pardo was talking about how there was this silence at first, and that silence loomed large in 1945 when the camps were liberated.
Certainly, Ginette Kolinka, who was in the same convoy as your family members, she didn't speak at all about her experience until the mid-90s. She worked in the market north of Paris. Of course, her prisoner number was visible, but some people might make comment on it, others wouldn't. She did not speak about it. She married, she had a child, she lived her life. And it was only in the mid-90s, after Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List came out, and then there was a foundation created, and she was asked to give testimony. She didn't want to at first. They were a bit insistent, and she finally did. And since then, she has been going into schools, going into universities, speaking to young people tirelessly, trying to say to them, and she says, my story isn't important. What's important is that you understand what hatred can cause, what it can provoke, how hateful man can become. You must understand that. And certainly her return to Paris, she did talk about her return to Paris. She went through the Hôtel Lutetia, so it was a luxury hotel which the French state chose as a kind of welcome center for those returning from the camps. Very few Jewish people returned. Most of the people who passed through the Lutetia were members of the resistance or political prisoners, and it was a pretty brutal return. They were sprayed with DDT pesticide. They were covered in lice and disease. But still, spraying them with pesticide was really quite something, and probably not a very good idea. They were questioned. There was fear that there were collaborators among them. And finally, they were given some medical care. But it wasn't a soft landing when those who managed to survive came back to France.
And you spoke about it with another survivor who, they were not all Jewish. At Auschwitz, 1 million Jews died, but there were 100,000 others.
Certainly, and there were other camps as well. And in January, Auschwitz was liberated, but it took a few more months for other camps to be liberated. I spoke to Jacqueline Fleury, 101 years old she is now, and she was at the Ravensbrück camp. She was part of the resistance. She was deported with her mother. And she told me a bit, Jacqueline Fleury, she told me a bit about what it was like coming back to France and her actual stay at the Lutetia with her mother. I think we can take a listen to that extract now.
They gave us a bedroom with 2 beds, but we took the mattress off the beds because we were used to sleeping on the floor.
Well, certainly that's an idea of what it was like. She was emaciated, she was extremely thin, she was extremely tired. And she also explained to us that when she got to the Lutetia, she was with her mother, and she was with another young woman who she'd become very close to during the whole dreadful period of deportation. And they were separated at the Lutetia because the other girl had family waiting for her. And she said it was such a painful separation. And then for years and years, of course, no one talked about it in France. It was a taboo subject for a very long time.
A taboo subject for decades. Bruno Halouya, there was under Jacques Chirac in the 1990s that the French state officially recognized what Omer Bartov was talking about earlier, that that first police roundup that took place in the summer of 1941.
Yes, it's a great gest of Jacques Chirac. For us, it's the most important action of Jacques Chirac. Imagine that during a lot of years, nobody want to accuse French police, and nobody want accuse the responsibility of French government of Vichy. Don't forget that François Mitterrand, who was president of Republic,
and who'd been in the resistance,
yes, was a very good friend of the man René Bousquet, who was the organizer of the Rafle du Veldiv, where 4,000 children were killed. It's terrible. You know, it's a lot of people that have bad action during the war. After the war, they continue to live, they continue to work, they have no problem. And with Jacques Chirac, it's a very clever discourse which changed all the with a lot of consequence. French have a responsibility for the deportation of Jewish in France.
Rachel Fleur-Pardo, political fortunes can change. Is that going to stay? There's no going back for that recognition of the French state's responsibility?
No, I think there is no going back. Actually, as a matter of fact, my family was living in Marseille and they were arrested also by the French police. And I think this recognition of the responsibility of France in all this had been of huge importance when Jacques Chirac eventually did it. And now we have to look forward. How do we here in France and in other places around the world, how do we ensure that the memory of the Holocaust is keeping alive? How do we ensure that we do not forget what happened? How do we ensure that the fact that there will soon be no more survivors does not give much more space for the negationists to spread their fake news all over the internet? We have to be really careful here. And we all here have a duty. We all here have had the chance to witness Holocaust survivors' testimonies about what happened to them while they were in deportation camps. And we have here to spread their words to our kids, the younger generations coming up, so that they can tell their kids later on, and so that this part of their history is never forgotten or changed or minimized as many want to transform it.
Omer Bartov, tell us your experience in the classroom. Younger generations more prone to disinformation?
I taught for quite a while various courses on the Holocaust. I also teach a large class on modern genocide, so genocide throughout the 20th century. What I find is, yes, there is a bit of a decline in enrollment in classes that deal directly with the Holocaust, but there is an interest, I think, in this phenomenon of crimes against humanity and genocide. And I just want to say that I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, when everyone said at the end of the war, never again, people often did not specify what they meant by never again. I think many young people today think about that. Never again what? Because the Holocaust, horrible as it was, and much as we must remember it and commemorate it and not allow its denial, the Holocaust itself was over. But there have been so many genocides since. And the lesson, I think, that we should draw, and I think many young people, to their credit, draw, is that we should never allow these kinds of crimes to happen again against Jews or against other minorities. And we live in a world now with so many different minorities, immigrants, ethnic minorities, religious minorities are being persecuted, and we cannot allow for that to happen, or for our commemoration of the Holocaust to serve as the only, as a kind of way out for us, not to look at what our own societies are doing and to focus only on the past and allow the present to, I would say, go by now, as we see with the rise of so many populist movements, so much racism rising in Europe and in the United States, not to allow that, again, in the name of honoring what had happened in World War II.
Yeah, and that brings us back to a point you made earlier. Among those on hand at Auschwitz, well, the Jewish president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, who's been repeatedly called by Vladimir Putin the leader of a Ukraino-Nazi regime. Zelensky, who Sunday attended a commemoration at Kyiv's Babin Yar Memorial, where more than 33,000 Jewish men, women, and children were killed in September 1941. And speaking of Vladimir Putin, not invited to Monday's service in Poland, instead laying a wreath in his hometown of St. Petersburg to mark the 81st anniversary of the city's liberation by the Nazis. So, dueling memories, Omer Bartov?
Yes, of course there are dueling memories. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, definitely dueling memories. One has to remember that Putin tried to justify his attack on Ukraine by saying that there was a genocide of Russians, of ethnic Russians happening in Ukraine, so as to justify this illegal attack. There are dueling memories, and there always were, as you say also, as we just heard about France. There were, for a long time, this whole story, the somber years of France were covered up, and the French government would not take responsibility for the crimes of Vichy. It is true that there are dueling memories, but what I would say is that for us, it's very important to look also reality in the face and not to allow those who manipulate memory in the name of remembering the past to get away with current crimes. And that we certainly see happening with Russia. I would say, unfortunately, being from Israel and writing about Israel, there has been also a great deal of manipulation of the memory of the Holocaust by an Israeli government that has been involved in an extraordinary amount of killing in Gaza as we speak.
Rachel Fleur-Pardo, I was speaking with a member of Ibuka, the memory organization for Rwanda, saying it begins with dehumanization.
Yeah, it begins with dehumanization, but I think we must say that there has been a lot of instrumentalization of different people calling French calling Jews Nazi recently, and especially here in France, we have seen the far left movements calling Jews Nazis, and we have seen many people around the world calling Jews Nazis. And I think this is a terrible inversion of history and responsibilities here, and I just wanted to mention it. Then, of course, like every story of survivors speak about how dehumanization is what happens first. How, when they arrived in concentration camps, they were first dehumanized. How did it take place? It was the number that were tattooed on their arms. That
but didn't it start years earlier?
Yeah, it started years earlier with how Jews were basically separated from the rest of the population, how Jews were marked as being only Jews, and that was all that was resting of their identity. And this began with what? It began with hate, with the hatred of the other, with anti-Semitism. And this is why we hear so many survivors, including Ginette Kolinka, saying all the time what she wants us to remember. It is that it is the hate of others that made Auschwitz possible. It is the fact that we do not accept difference. And this is also why she says, and why many other survivors say, that tolerance is so important if we want to avoid having it happen again.
What's spectacular for us sitting here in Paris, Bruno Alouya, is, of course, this happened on European soil. And there have been other genocides even in Europe since. So we think of what happened during the war in Bosnia, for instance, but it's not on the same scale. And also this particularity, you're a medical doctor. The fact that this was technology and science put at the service of mass murder.
Yes. Can we imagine that the number of Nobel Prize in Germany was superior if we made the addition of Nobel Prize in France, in Great Britain, in US before the war? Germany was the most important, the most intellectual country of the West world. And in Auschwitz, the particularity of Auschwitz, it's for me as a doctor, in medical doctor, it's the most black page of history of medicine. Why? Because in Auschwitz, the SS who make the selection when people arrive was a doctor. And it was not, it was doctors from the most important universities of Germany. They have children, they love music, and every day they were the most important serial killers of the humanities. Can you imagine that the 6th June 1944, there were more people killed in Auschwitz than the summation of soldiers, US soldier, British soldier, German soldier, Canadian soldier.
Killed on the beaches of Normandy.
Yes. Every day you have between 4,000, 6,000, 7,000.
How do you explain this, that these learned men, they were mostly men, would put their science to this end, at the service of this?
There is an impregnation of a spirit, of a idea, that some people have life that is not important. But it's terrible, because can we imagine that in the moment Joseph Mengele has a pregnant woman, she has a boy who was born in 1944, and he has a boy in the same age that he sees the many boys every day that he tell to them, go in this direction to the gas chamber. It's terrible to imagine that men with a good spirit at first make medical experiment. And you imagine that in October 1944, Paris was liberated. The Russians were about 100 kilometers, and they continue to kill the Jewish. It's terrible. And the men, you know, in Auschwitz there is only 7 medical doctor SS, but they have the responsibility of the system of extermination. And it's very important to insist that the fact that it was people who were very educated, they like music, and they hasn't problem to kill thousands of people every day.
Omer Bartov, we're not going to go, because unfortunately it's television and the time is short, into all the reasons for what happened during World War II, the trauma of World War I, the mechanization of agriculture, the advent of mass media like the radio. But it was a period of upheaval. When do you look out for the signs of upheaval returning and fostering this kind of spirit, as you heard there Dr. Halouia describe it?
Well, I think that there are 2 important elements here, and both were mentioned by other speakers. One is dehumanization. When you start speaking about certain categories of people as less than human, as they said in Rwanda, the Tutsi were cockroaches. As they said about the Jews, they were vermin, Ungeziefer. When you start speaking about people as not being part of your circle of human solidarity, then that's the first phase toward genocide. The second thing I would say, of course, yes, at the end of World War I, Europe has been saw a huge amount of destruction. One thing that came up was the notion that there was life unworthy of life, that there were some people who did not deserve to live. At the time, it was first of all the disabled. And the disabled were a burden on society. And the same people who started the killing of the disabled under the Nazi regime, they moved over to start the killing of Jews, of Roma, and of other people. That notion that it's crucial, because the people were saying that, as was said before, they were scientists. They were people who were greatly honored. The 2 professions that create the modern societies that we know, the legal profession and the medical profession, the scientists, they were those who sanctioned genocide. And I think that one lesson we must draw is that we must always be careful when we are told that something is legal or illegal, or something is dictated by science or not. We have to always search our own conscience and see, is this indeed the case, or are we being led by people who tell us that they're the authority toward crimes?
So fast forward to 2025, where does the danger lie, not just for one category, not just for Jews, but for all of humanity?
Look, I mean, I think right now we are seeing so many crises that are the result of a variety of factors, of instability in the world because of a climate crisis that is unaddressed and that will create more and more violence, migration of people. We're seeing also a disenchantment with the democratic liberal order and the rise of political forces that are based on forgetting everything that had happened in World War II and disrupting the international order that was put into place as a consequence of that. And there are not enough voices around in Europe, in the United States, to say we must learn from that past. We must know that if we begin now this process of dehumanizing groups, whether they're immigrants, whether they're our own minorities, we will end up mobilizing exactly the same forces in the name of order, in the name of science, that led to the horrific genocide of World War II.
France's president present at that ceremony. He was also present this morning at the Shoah Memorial, the old Jewish ghetto of the Marais in the heart of Paris. You were there too, Rachel Flore Pardo.
Yeah.
Tell us just, this commemoration, is it just preaching to the choir? Is it just an echo chamber when you go to these commemorations? Or are you reaching out beyond just the group?
I think we are reaching around beyond, because there is always that work that is done, that is to bring, children, young adults to join this place and to listen to the voices of the survivors. And this is what really this day is about. This is why really the 27th of January is about. It is about commemorating those who died during World War II, those who died in Auschwitz, and those who survived with great suffering. And this is why also I think that this day is for their remembrance, and that any comparison is today really inappropriate. We have to use this day for what it is. It is the anniversary of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and this is what we are speaking about today. We are speaking about the Shoah. It is indeed in the past, but it is a day to remember what happened in the past, so we can indeed have from that, learn from that lessons for the present and the future.
What was the biggest lesson you learned speaking to those survivors?
Well, certainly, just to go back to your point about doctors, and this is something that does certainly chime with what I learned with the survivors, is we heard from Leon Weintraub during the ceremony earlier on today. He's a survivor, but he also was a doctor. He emigrated to Sweden after surviving the camps. He was experiencing anti-Semitism in his home country in Poland, and he said, as a doctor, as a surgeon, it doesn't matter what colour someone's skin is. When I go below the surface, the tissue is always the same. And we need to be sensitive to other people's differences. And that really does ring true with what all the survivors that I spoke to, is that underneath it all, we're all human beings and we are all the same, and we do need to be sensitive and tolerant to the differences we have between us.
And that's a message that's not obvious?
Unfortunately not. Look where we are today.
That's a message that requires to be reminded, unfortunately, more and more. We can see here in France, there are recent numbers about anti-Semitism, racism, anti-Semitism. The hate of others is on the rise here in France and across Europe. Since October 7th, since the terrible massacres that Hamas committed in Israel, we have seen anti-Semitism explode in France and in Europe and in the world. And this is really scary because, as we can see, the voices of the survivors are soon not going to be able to be heard anymore. And so that is why we have today to tell with strength what happened, so that indeed it does not happen again.
Bruno Halouyan?
My mother, who is 91 years old, doesn't speak about what it's past during the war. She decided to speak because of a negationist.
Because of the Holocaust deniers.
And actually, yesterday she told to me, I never imagined what is now. Yes. I'm not afraid of me, because she's an old woman. I'm afraid about these grandchildren. She doesn't imagine that the descendant will have problem, not because they are Jewish. And it's important to insist on the fact that during the war, some people were religious, some people were not religious. But for German people, a Jewish rests Jewish. Even if you be converted to Catholic, you continue to be Jewish. You are shown as a Jewish. And for us, we make a study in 100 Holocaust survivors who tell that the situation actually is for them very similar with what they lived during the war. They have the same impression of indifference of political parties, and they have the same, they agree to see that media, the power of the media, they don't understand, they never imagine, they don't speak because they never imagine that somebody will tell that what the Shoah is a unique in the history of humanities. And actually, some people make very horrible comparison. And that is not good.
An unfiltered world we live in. I want to thank you, Bruno Halouyan. I want to thank as well Rachel Flore Pardo, Omar Bartov for being with us from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Claire Pacalin. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24.